This video contains spoilers for Sex Education Season 4. More importantly, as a content warning, it discusses sexual harassment and assault. Welcome to Noosh Channel. I'm Noosh. This is not my house. I just got back from Halloween. This wasn't actually my original costume idea. I went to a party over the weekend as Roderick Heffley from Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Got my loaded diaper shirt. I love Sex Education. I love the concept, I love the characters, I love the humor.
Pop it and pop it! Not at me, I'm faculty!
I love the chaos. I love Asa Butterfield and Shusi Gatwa and Anthony Lexa. I love the growth everyone does during the show. And I love that it covers such a huge range of incredibly important topics. Which is why I think it's so weird that they left such a big one out. Season 4, Episode 4 raised red flags for a lot of people. At the start of this episode, Michael Groff comes home with a date. They try to have sex unsuccessfully, and she's pretty forceful and leaves him humiliated. The show attributes it not working out to Michael just missing his ex-wife, but the discomfort and the intimidation that she inflicts on him are not only ignored, but they're played up for laughs. And this actually reminded me of another major encounter that was outright non-consensual, when Otis and Ruby first get together in Season 2. As I'll go into, Otis repeatedly says that he is too drunk to remember the encounter, and that means that he was not in a position to consent to sex. Obviously, this is pretty terrible, but it's especially strange when you know what kind of show Sex Education is. It goes out of its way to address social issues, particularly to do with sex, and one of its biggest recurring themes was sexual consent in women. It started all the way back in Season 1 when Ruby got her nude leaked and Maeve explained why everyone was calling her a cockbiter.
Do you know how long I've been called cockbiter? 4 years. People I've never met call me cockbiter to my face. I bit Simon Firthassel's scrote. I had sex with 4 guys at the same time. I fucked my second cousin. I'll give you a handjob for a £5 if you like. Do you know how it started? Simon tried to kiss me at Claire Tyler's 14th birthday. I said no. So he told everyone I'd given him a blowjob bit in his dick. And that was it. This kind of thing sticks. And it hurts, and no one deserves to be shamed, not even Ruby.
The show not only delivered these storylines, but also focused on the fallout of how women and girls can be violated beyond the instance in which they say no. Amy is sexually assaulted on a bus in Season 2, and the storyline of how she works through it becomes a huge part of the show for 2 full seasons, as it should. The show doesn't try to speed up the story to keep the narrative fresh. It continues it for 2 seasons because it knows that sometimes it can take that much time to heal from this sort of stuff. Sometimes it can take more. So they handle women's consent really well. I also noticed that they're very explicit about making sure their gay characters get consent. But when it comes to straight male consent, there's a couple of times in the show where it's actively disregarded for laughs. It's really strange to me that a show that is so socially conscious about topics from vaginismus to menopause leaves out something as important as consent for half of the population. Obviously, rape culture disproportionately harms women, and it's more likely to happen to women, and them leaving this out doesn't take away from the incredible work that they've done analysing and condemning this topic. But it happens to men too, and it needs to be discussed, and it needs to be condemned. One good thing that can come out of this is by looking at how they handled it and seeing in what ways they could honour male consent better. So let's take a look at these scenes in more detail. In Season 4, Episode 4, Michael returns home from a date with a co-worker, Gloria. She initiates, roughly, and he seems enthusiastic. He gets undressed. Then, as she does her thing, he looks like he's very obviously in pain, and it looks like it's really being played up for laughs. It's such a weird and uncomfortable choice for such a sex-positive show to depict somebody having a bad sexual experience and then not address it in any way. Like, he's not even touching her. He's frozen. And as anyone with 2 brain cells to rub together will tell you, if somebody freezes up during your sexual encounter, they probably want you to stop. Stop. She does stop when he asks her to, but when he says he's not ready to have sex, she outright demeans him.
Sorry, I just need a moment. I guess sometimes I have a little trouble performing at the drop of a hat. We could just have a nice cuddle instead.
Thank you for dinner, Michael. But I really need a proper man in the bedroom. Someone who wants to rip my clothes off.
Yes, absolutely. Lovely to see you.
Dennis, it's Gloria. Fancy a quickie at mine? Oh, yes.
He starts outright hiding from her at work. Maybe because he was embarrassed, but maybe because when he couldn't have sex, she was outright horrible to him as a result. I don't know, man. I'm not the only person who thinks that encounter was really uncomfortable. But then he calls sexology, trying to figure out why it didn't happen for him. He says he wanted to have a one-night stand to move on from his ex-wife, but then he says it made him feel
Humiliating and made me feel pathetic. Like I'm not a real man.
not a real man. Not his words, Gloria's. They clearly had a really bad impact on him. Hell, even the song that was playing in the background was Are You Man Enough? Maybe he left out the discomfort and coercion because he didn't feel coerced, even though he looks pretty damn uncomfortable to me. But just because he might not feel coerced, it doesn't make her actions not coercive. Sexual coercion is trying to threaten or pressure somebody into sexual activities, maybe pressuring them by making them feel guilty or bad about themselves. But instead of looking into why he felt humiliated and not like a real man, which are both pretty alarming words to describe your sexual encounter, they start asking him about his ex-wife. And then they determine that in order for him to function, he needs to have a secure romantic connection, which is important for some people, but it's not nearly as important as feeling safe and being treated respectfully. They obviously needed a mechanic to lead Michael back to his ex-wife, but they could have used this story to do the same thing, but had it go much more differently and be much more beneficial to the people watching the show. It could have stayed mostly the same and had the same outcome, but be used as one of sex education's classic storytelling opportunities. Maybe it could discuss how important it is to feel safe with the person you're sleeping with, whether you're a younger woman or an older man. It actually also would have really fit with his whole arc of going from this repressed knot of toxic masculinity to realizing that in order to become a better person, you need to care for yourself as well as for other people. And to make it work in the way that the show needs it to, maybe Jean and O could be like, hey, don't go back to this person who doesn't make you feel respected. Try only sleeping with people who make you feel safe. And he could be like, who makes me feel safe? My ex-wife. Ta-da! Or his date could have just been less horrible. Whatever works. The other major instance of sex education's violation of male consent is in season 2, when Otis gets stupid drunk at his party, he and Ruby have sex, and then when he wakes up, he repeatedly says that he does not remember what happened.
Why are you in my bed?
If you tell anyone about this, I'll destroy your life.
Did we have sex?
Of course we had sex, Otis. I'm not here because I enjoy your company, but I can't find the condom.
We had sex without a condom.
Man has no idea what's going on. You might be thinking, hey, he's hungover, he just woke up, maybe he's still defrosting, but
I had sex with Ruby.
What? Are you sure you had sex?
Oh, she definitely thinks we had sex. The details are hazy.
she thinks we had sex? Do you remember it at all? That's quite bad. They use the fact that it diverged from his expectations for his virginity loss as comedy.
Probably wasn't the romantic Forest Glade fantasy you imagined with Maeve.
I did not imagine that.
But you are not a virgin anymore? What?
It's not.
But they prioritize him losing his virginity over his safety. And even though that might be a realistic thing for teenagers to do, it's very out of character for sex education to not later correct this in some way. Then Otis asks Ruby if he got her consent, which he's raised in a very sex-positive household. Surely if he remembered one thing from their encounter, it would be the consent part. And even though Ruby says the details are a bit hazy, she later says that it was 100% intentional, meaning that she was sound enough of mind to know what was going on. Otis, however, doesn't remember a goddamn thing. You could point out that sex therapist Otis would be able to point this out independently given his wealth of understanding, and if he didn't point it out, then maybe it didn't happen. But it's actually much harder to place this stuff when it happens to you. You could be the most staunch feminist boundary advocate, but when yours are violated, it can be much harder to respond to that the way you would respond to it happening to other people. And if you've drank enough to not be able to remember what happened, you were too drunk to give consent. And Otis seems okay with it, but just like with Michael, just because Otis is okay with the aftermath doesn't mean that it was an okay thing to happen. So how could this have gone? It's likely that they didn't want to put Otis and Ruby in such a bad light at the start of their relationship, but I actually think them looking into this would put them in much better footing. I want to be really clear here. Not getting consent is bad. There is genuine ambiguity about how much Ruby realized, though, and it would put her in a much better light if they showed just how unaware of how drunk he was, and maybe she could be actively remorseful and upset when she found out. Also, though, even though it would be very valid for him to be upset about it, he seems pretty okay with it, which can also happen sometimes when drunk people have sexual encounters they don't remember. So, it wouldn't be the most insane conversation in the world for him to be like, "Hey, Ruby, by the way, I don't actually remember the sex we had. I was blackout drunk, and even though I don't regret it, the fact that I don't remember it means I wasn't sober enough to give consent." Maybe Ruby could be like, "I don't understand, you seemed to want it last night." Otis could do some eloquent sex therapist explaining about how consent under the influence works and have a moment of strength advocating for himself about how even though he's jazzed that he had sex for the first time, he's not super comfortable about how drunk he was. Ruby could be like, "Oh, I had no idea. I'm really sorry. I hope you're okay." Otis could be like, "Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Maybe we could do it sober sometime." Ruby could be like, "Don't get your hopes up," and then they could cycle back together. I mean, something like that. If you think that sounds shit, leave me alone. I'm not a writer of sex education. If you think that sounds good, imagine how much better the writers of sex education would have made it. Seriously, why didn't they do that? They have no problem having these open, structured discussions about any other topic, and this seems like a pretty important one. There's a Vogue article from 2020 that points out how not one person, including his sex therapist mother, asks if he was okay with what happened. I reckon this leans into the perception of how men are always desperate for sex. Eric being like, "I know this isn't what you wanted, but hey man, at least you got laid." But this means that the need for straight male consent is often totally overlooked, to the point where the Vogue article points out the non-for-profit organization 1 in 6 that estimates 1 in 6 men have been sexually abused. Sex Education is a show that's taken on the responsibility to portray, analyze, and teach its viewers about sexual issues, relationships, and safety. So the fact that the final season not only didn't address its huge lapse in season 2, but actively added onto it, is both confusing and concerning. Though every other topic they covered was incredibly important, this was a really big one too. Hell, leaving it out would be more justifiable than repeatedly exploiting the issue for comedy. If you do return to the show and its messages, keep this one in mind too. Society has made incredible progress allowing a show like Sex Education to become as popular as it has, but if shows like this are actively rejecting discussing straight male consent, then there's still a lot of work to do. Female and non-binary consent are huge issues, but male consent is just as important.
Thank you for watching me talk. Bye.